Welcome to our lecture of the day. Today we are looking at land reform and indigenous rights in Zimbabwe. So let's get started. So we want to look at the importance of land reform and indigenous rights in Zimbabwe. Is rooted in historical injustices, looking at economic empowerment and the quest of social justice. So I want to look at the key reason why these issues hold significance. That's what we are discussing today. So we have what we call historical injustice, because as you know, the history of Zimbabwe, including the period of the colonial rule, during which land was often forcibly taken from the indigenous communities. And land reform is aiming to address those historical injustices by seeking to rectify imbalances created during colonial times and restore lands to its rightful owners, because the indigenous people are the rightful owners of that land, because the land was taken forcibly by the foreigners during the colonial rule. So that's what we mean by historical injustices. So this is the key reason why it holds significance, because we are retaining the land to the rightful owners of that land. Then let's look at social justice and equity. So land reform is a tool for achieving social justice and equity. Because you know that social justice is just a way in trying to say we are looking at a society whereby we are trying to have them being given a fair reason for their corporate existence, whereby social justice is aiming to the redistribution of land to indigenous people. It aims to correct the disparities in land ownership, those differences that were created by the colonial rule, whereby the white elites were the one who were owning large plots of land, whereby the indigenous people were not having any access to land. So when we talk about those disparities in land ownership, social justice and equity is aiming to say that we want to have land being equal, distributed equally to all. That's what I mean by equal equity, fairness, and equal distribution. This process seeks to empower those who were historically marginalized. We have people who were marginalized communities whereby they didn't have the right to farm, they didn't have access to land, they were just marginalized, they didn't have any place that they call home. So social justice is aiming to rectify that by looking at the redistribution of the land to the indigenous people. Then looking at also empowerment of the indigenous communities. So land reform, its aim is to make sure that we empower the indigenous communities, because these are the sole owners of that land. So by empowering them, we're giving them economically and socially. Economically, we're giving them resources that they can use to farm, and socially, looking into what things are affecting them, their livelihood. And when we give them access to land, we are providing the opportunities for them to practice agricultural production. As you know, our country was the breadbasket of Africa. We were very best in agricultural production. So by actually empowering our indigenous communities, we are going to return to that basket status that we once had. And also we are looking at income generations, because they're going to producing useful output that's going to create income generations that can sustain their livelihood, their children, so they can send their children to schools, and the community development, whereby we are seeing clinics being built, we are seeing boreholes being drilled. This is all in line with community development, whereby we are talking about community in action, right? This empowerment is crucial for poverty alleviation, improving the overall quality of life. The most significant thing is that the land reform is trying to reduce the poverty alleviation by giving them access to the land that they're solely the owners of, and also by empowering them. We're now saying that your participation is now very important in improving your overall quality of life. Because once you start farming, you start getting income, then your quality of life will improve. Because right now you have a variety of goods to choose from. Because you now have the income that you have created, but you have created through empowerment. Then we have cultural correction and identity. Because remember, when we talk about cultural connection, is that correct connection? We are just trying to say that look at our previous lecture. We're talking about cultural erosion, how the colonial rule came and tried to erase our culture from us. But when you talk about cultural connection in identity, we're trying to identify ourselves as the indigenous communities, because that's our identity. So we're looking at land being something that holds a cultural significance, because our land is linked to our ancestors. They were once uh, here on that land. They were utilizing it centuries and centuries ago. So that's the issue of cultural significance. And for many indigenous communities, it is integral to identity. That's what identifies us. That's the identity. Then you also have to look at land reform recognizes and respect the cultural connections. That's the main agenda behind the land reform. The idea of respecting the cultural connection by giving people access to their land that they're solely allowed to own between the people and their ancestral land, fostering a sense of belongingness because already this is the land that belonged to their ancestors. So that sense of belonging is in the preserving that cultural heritage is very important. That's how we create our own identity. That's the cultural connections because already they have ties to the land that they are owning because their ancestral land. Then let's look at agricultural productivity and food security, which is a key thing, a key important issue when you look at the agricultural sector and food security as a country. So land reform did contribute to increase agricultural productivity. Overall, we are now producing more output because once you give someone who is solely an owner of the land, he understands this land belongs to me. It's now my responsibility to add value on that land. That is what led to the increase. And also the empowerment of those communities have increased agricultural productivity by placing land in the hands of those who have vested interest in its sustainable use because it's theirs. This in turn enhances food security, addresses the fundamental access of the well-being of the population because overall, once you become productive, you are increasing the well-being of the whole population. Everyone now, their livelihood is going to improve, which is a very key important issue. Then we always have to look at national sovereignty. Is sovereignty what sovereignty and independence represents? Whereby we're talking about black power farms, whereby we're talking about land reform, is closely tied to the broader narrative of national sovereignty and independence. Our sovereignty state. The struggle of control over land has its historical roots in the fight of self-determination because we had to fight to get our land, and as the ownership and the use of the land are key components of the national autonomy, that's the idea that we went through the struggle of getting over our land. The historical roots whereby we had to fight for self-determination, whereby we say that we're supposed to have black power farms. This is our land, and we're supposed to be the farmers. We're supposed to be the one who farms this land. That's the idea of having self-determination. So that was very important because that's promoted the national sovereignty and the independence that shows that we are now independent in our own country. That's what was very significantly important. Then we look at the redistribution of economic resources. Because was very imbalanced in the redistribution of those resources. Because land is a phenomenal economic resource, which is finite in supply. Because if someone is owning large lands in the colonial rule, they were owning large hectares, whereby they were just in the hands of a few, and the rest was left to suffer through in being trapped in poverty. So we're looking at land reform, seeking to redistribute these resources more equitably, equal distribution equitably, ensuring that a broader section of the population can benefit from its economic potential. That was the major agenda, rather than being concentrated in a few hands of a few. So it's like we are giving, we are redistributing equitably the benefits that we are reaping from the economic resources, to giving them the proceeds to the indigenous people. Then we have rural development. The rural areas has undergone rapid development because if you look at the land reform, there's been investment in rural areas contributing to development infrastructure, education, and healthcare. In the past, they didn't have access to clinics. They would travel long kilometers to go because there was a colonial rule which was not giving them access to proper sanitation. But when you look at the Land Reform Act, once the land reform took effect, we look at the development infrastructure. Right now, we're looking at rural electrification, which is happening right now, whereby infrastructure is being developed, bore drilling, whereby there are solar pumps and they have tanks that they are now having access to clean and safe water, and they have access to education. The government has been building schools. Uh, this historical approach aims to improve the life condition of the rural communities, whereby the same urban development that is happening is supposed to be trickled down to the rural. Rural also experiencing the same development. That is the idea of rural electrification. This is in line with the rural development. And also have to look at global recognition of human rights. So land reform aligns with international principles of human rights because it was our sole land that that's land that has been retained to its rightful owners, particularly the rights of the indigenous people have been a key issue in the global recognition, whereby globally they are now recognizing that Zimbabwe is a country that owns its land. It reflects Zimbabwe's commitment to respecting these rights and gaining global recognition for its efforts to address historical injustice. That's the idea that we are trying to reflect and show the whole world that this is what we do. This is Zimbabwe. This is our land that belongs to our indigenous people. We are addressing those historical injustices that were there, that were preventing our people access to that land. And we are now saying they now have access to that land. That's why we are attracting the global recognition that other countries are coming on board, saying that Zimbabwe is now a country that has its own resources that is utilizing and is the sole owners of those resources. They have a right on the land because it's our land. Then, in looking at the summary, while land reform and indigenous rights are crucial for achieving social justice and economic empowerment, as we have stated throughout the rest of the lecture, but the success of this initiative relies on careful planning. There is need for careful planning and transparent processes and sustainable land management practices to ensure long-term benefits for all stakeholders, for all Zimbabweans. It's supposed to be benefiting all stakeholders, but there's need for sustainable land management, which means there's a proper need for them to acquire certain skills so that we can have careful planning whereby things are supposed to be thought out properly. This is all in line with land reform of the indigenous people. So thank you so much for listening to this discussion. So make sure that you understand what we're discussing, and it's a very interesting lecture. I'll see you on the next lecture.